this course, psycholinguistics, we have discussed language processing, and we said that language processing means language production and language perception. So in today's lecture we are going to discuss language production. In the next lecture we are going to discuss language perception. So what do we mean by language production? It is producing speech, it is speaking. So here we have a nice picture which shows how do we start, how do we plan speaking. So first you have, if you read it from the left to the right, first you have an idea, then you start lexical selection, then you do some syntactic representation, then finally you do phonological representation, then your brain gives instructions to the speech organs and you produce speech. So it's a process which is done in a split of a second. Before you speak, you plan, then you speak. You don't start speaking without any form of planning. First you plan, then you speak. So the contents of today's lecture are: first we are going to discuss bilingual speakers production, then we are going to discuss planning speech, the stages of planning speech. There are 5 stages in planning speech. The first is accessing the lexicon, the second is building simple sentence structure, the third is creating agreement relations, the fourth is building complex structure, and the last is preparing a phonological representation. Okay? The second or the third part of today's lecture is producing speech. We're going to discuss the source filter model of vowel production, the acoustic characteristics of consonants and co-articulation. Okay, now let's begin with the first part of the lecture, which is bilingual speakers production. We have 2 modes for bilinguals. What do we mean bilingual? Bilinguals. Bilinguals are people who are able to speak 2 languages. They are called bilinguals. Bilinguals, for example, people who are able to speak Arabic and English, like the majority of you. You are able to speak both Arabic and English. So for those people who are able to speak 2 languages, they have 2 modes while speaking. They might have the bilingual mode or the unilingual mode. So let's start with the first one, the unilingual mode. The unilingual mode, the bilingual speaker, sometimes he is just speaking with his first language. So for the majority of you, while you are speaking to your mother or to your father or to your brother or sister, the majority of you are in the unilingual mode. You are able to speak English, but you are switching off this ability. You are just using one language, which is Arabic. So this is called unilingual mode. You are able to speak another language, but at the moment you are just speaking with one form, with one mode, with one language. This is called unilingual mode. In this mode you are consulting only one of the grammars. So consulting only one of the grammars leads to the production in one of the 2 languages. So as you are speaking in unilingual mode, you are not consulting the 2 languages. You are just consulting one form of grammar. So inside your head you have the knowledge, the grammatical knowledge of the 2 languages. You have the grammatical knowledge of English and the grammatical knowledge of Arabic. You are not consulting them both. You are just consulting the grammatical knowledge of Arabic. So in this mode you are just consulting one form of grammar, and this leads to the production in only one of the 2 languages you know. What about the other form, bilingual mode? When the bilinguals 2 languages are being used in the same conversation, the speaker has access to both grammars and lexical items from both languages. So this may lead to code switching. What do we mean by code switching? It is switching between two languages. And this happens to the majority of people, the majority of bilinguals. As they speak, they switch between two languages. For the majority of you, you are able to speak Arabic and English. And perhaps you speak a third language. So as you are speaking, you are consulting the two grammars at the same time. This may lead to code switching. You speak in Arabic, then you switch to English and switch back to Arabic in the same conversation. This is called code switching. Why does it happen? It happens because you are consulting both languages inside your brain. Okay, now let's move on to the stages of speech production. Speech production has two main stages. The first is planning. So before you speak, you plan. What happens after planning? It is actual production. So now let's move to the first stage, which is hidden, which is unseen, because there's no utterance yet. It is just planning. So the first stage in the planning. So planning has its own stages. So here we have two stages, planning and actual production. Planning has stages, 1, 2, 3, and actual production is just production. So let's move to the first stage of planning, which is accessing the lexicon. The first thing you do in planning speech is accessing the lexicon, lexical retrieval. A word can be retrieved using two kinds of information, meaning or sound. So you can recall, you can bring, you can retrieve, you can remember or bring together words by using two means. You can bring words together by their meaning or sound. So the speaker selects the appropriate word to the conversation. I'm not sure whether you have heard of the term synonyms before. If you haven't, synonyms are two words with the same meaning. So as you are speaking, you are retrieving words, you are bringing together words. This is called lexical retrieval. You are bringing the most appropriate word of the synonyms. The synonyms are many words which can mean the same, but as you are speaking, you are choosing the best one. So this is in the stage of accessing the lexicon. What happens after the lexicon is accessed? You have the words. What happens next? Building simple sentence structure. This is called grammatical encoding. So after you have brought the words together, you start to build syntax. You start to build a grammar. You start to build a sentence. But again, this is just simple because it is not produced yet. It is just like construction, grammatical encoding, building a linguistic structure for the intended meaning. So you have a meaning inside your head, you have the words, now you just bring the words together and form a sentence. After you have formed the first stage of the sentence, which is called simple sentence structure, you start to create agreement relations. What do we mean by agreement relations? For example, subject-verb agreement. In Arabic, the noun has to agree with the verb. You can't say hiya ruhna. I'm now using I'm not using the Fusha, I'm using the language you use daily. You can't say hiya ruhna. Why? Because there is no agreement between hiya, which is the feminine, the third person feminine form, hiya, with the plural form, rihna. You cannot say hiya rihna. Why? Because there is no subject-verb agreement. So you have to, before you speak, you have to sort all these things before you speak. You have to sort them out. So you create agreement relations. You create agreement between the noun and the verb, between the subject and the verb, between the pronoun and the verb. This is called creating agreement relations. This is a stage which is even before speaking. This is just one of the stages of planning. The fourth stage of planning speech is building complex sentence structure. So after the agreement relations have been made, the sentence is put in the final form. This is called building complex sentence structure. You put the sentence in its final form, which is just ready for the utterance, just ready to be produced. You have complex structure, you have multi-clausual sentences. So the sentence is ready in its final form. Now happens the final stage, which is preparing a phonological representation. So syntactically, after the sentence is ready, you prepare the phonological representation. You prepare it phonologically. This happens, as I said earlier, in a split of a second. It happens even without your awareness. This is subconscious. This is in a subconscious level. As I've said in the first lecture, language processing is subconscious. It happens without you being aware of that. So the final stage of planning speech is putting the syntax into phonological form, ready to be spoken, ready to be uttered. So the second stage of speech production is the actual production of the speech. So after you have completely planned the speech, it is ready for production, the brain gives instructions to the speech organs. What do we mean by speech organs? The tongue, the vocal tract, the lungs. The brain starts to give instructions to these speech organs in order to utter, in order to speak. Now let's take the exercise. If there is a mismatch, I'm going to correct it between the contents and to the actual contents. Don't worry about the first page contents because it has stages which I have not discussed. So don't worry about this. I'm going to correct it. What you have to study for the exam is what you have here. Forget about what you have here in the contents page because I'm going to edit it. You don't have to worry about the source filter model of vowel production. You don't have to worry about these three things: co-articulation and acoustic characteristics. You have to study just the real contents. Okay? So let's do the exercise together. Lexical retrieval is a stage in language perception, or is it a stage in language production, or is it a vocabulary experiment, or none of the previous is correct? So lexical retrieval, we have discussed lexical retrieval. Is it a stage in language production or language perception, or is it just a vocabulary experiment? The answer is B. It is a stage in language production. As you can see in this slide, lexical retrieval is one of the stages of planning, which is speech production. So the answer is B, because lexical retrieval is a stage in language production. To be more accurate, it is a stage of language planning, and language planning is one of the stages of language production. Thanks very much for listening, and see you in the next lecture.